It's 1991, and the Soviet Union is falling apart. With the regime's grip on power fading, Russian geologist Alexander Edonin decides it's finally safe to share a secret he's been keeping for years: the location of the Romanov family's hidden graves, buried since their execution in 1918. He directs investigators several miles north of Yekaterinburg to a small hollow called Pig's Meadow, not exactly a name appropriate for royalty. But there, in a shallow pit, investigators find the remains of 9 corpses. The bodies are identified as Tsar Nicholas, the Tsarina Alexandra, 3 of their daughters, and 4 royal staff. But shockingly, the investigators believe that the bodies of Anastasia and her brother Alexei are missing. Could Anna Anderson have been telling the truth? Anna died swearing she was Anastasia, and in 1994, a decade after her passing, burgeoning DNA science would finally answer her claim. A tissue sample of Anna's was tested, and it confirmed something remarkable. She was not a match for any Romanov DNA. In fact, further investigation would reveal that she was a Polish-born woman named Franziska Szankowska. After moving to Berlin when she was 18, she reportedly suffered mental health issues after her lover, a German soldier, was killed in action. She also suffered head injuries in an explosion at a munitions factory. After being taken to a hospital for a suicide attempt, she refused to identify herself and was admitted as Miss Unknown to a mental institution, where she declared that she was indeed the Grand Duchess Anastasia. Whether or not this was a manipulative scam or simply the mental illness of a lonely young woman will never be known. What is a fact, however, is that Anna Anderson was not Anastasia Romanov. But Princess Anastasia's body is missing from her family's grave. So what happened to her? Could she have escaped her execution? Now, a new discovery finally reveals the truth about her fate. In 2007, a team searching 200 feet away from the mass grave finds the skeletal remains of 2 more people. Scientist Michael Koebel is brought in to help identify the bones.
I am a forensic geneticist and I've been in the field for about 28 years now. And one of the big things that I worked on in my career was improving techniques to get more information from compromised remains. The initial mass grave that was found in the 1990s, most of the individuals that were in that mass grave were complete skeletons. These remains that were found in 2007, they were fragments, they were pieces, they were not complete skeletons. In fact, there were only 44 bone fragments. And if you think about it, humans have over 200 bones in their body. And if there were 2 individuals, you would expect to find 400 bones. We found about 1/10 of that.
Despite finding mostly minimal bone fragments, Koebel is able to conduct highly specialized DNA tests on the most substantial remains.
There were a few fragments that were large enough that we could take samples of to test. We were very fortunate that we had 2 leg bones, one from a female and one from a male. We absolutely identified Alexei, the son, the only son of the Tsar and the Tsarina.
The DNA results also confirm that other leg bone belongs to one of Tsar Nicholas's daughters. However, with 4 daughters, it isn't immediately clear which one. Previously, experts believed Anastasia's remains were missing from the mass grave discovered in 1995, but the size of the recently found leg bone casts doubt on that theory.
There were a lot of mysteries that surrounded the identification of the original members of the mass grave. Based upon the limited amount of anthropology that was done at the time, they knew the height of the daughters, but the problem is that the last year of her life, Anastasia had a growth spurt, and she was about the same height as her sister Maria.
So let's get this straight. They originally believed that the daughters buried in the mass graves were the three older sisters because the length of the skeletons matched their heights. But this recent discovery of another female leg bone matching both the height of Anastasia or her sister Maria begs an important question. Was the daughter missing from the original grave truly Anastasia, or could it have been Maria? To find out, researchers reevaluated the initial investigation.
A friend of mine who is an anthropologist in Moscow, he said, "You know, Michael, it's very funny. There were 5 children that went into that cellar and there were over 200 came out because over 200 people have claimed that they were one of the missing Romanov children." The most famous, of course, is Anna Anderson, who claimed that she was Anastasia. And if she could prove to the courts that she was, in fact, the living daughter of Tsar Nicholas, she would have set to make a lot of his fortune. So back in 2007, I was the chief of the research section at the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. This is a laboratory that identifies military individuals, usually from previous conflicts, but also current-day deaths in the military. And as the head of the research section, of course, I was working on that we could get more information from these challenge samples. We got a phone call one day from a good friend of mine. He was an American who actually knew all of the people in Russia who had been working on this case since the early 90s. And he asked if we would be potentially interested in helping because they have found some skeletal remains in this area where the mass grave was. The Russian scientists did facial reconstruction of the skull from that mass grave in the 1990s. And based upon their information, they were very confident that Anastasia was in that mass grave and that Maria was missing. And so based upon their analysis, we decided to identify the unknown individual as Maria, and that meant Anastasia was originally part of that mass grave that was recovered back in the early 1990s. And all of the family were executed in July of 1918. So at this point in our testing, we had performed the mitochondrial DNA analysis, and we were able to confirm that these individuals have the same mitochondrial sequence that you found in the mass grave of the Tsarina. The next step that we took is to try to determine if these are in fact 2 children of Tsar Nicholas. And so we performed some additional testing. This is the same kind of testing that crime labs across the world perform every single day. There's a set of markers. They're called short tandem repeat, or STR markers. So we actually did some additional testing on the remains that were recovered in the 1990s of the family, the Tsar, the Tsarina, and 3 of the children. We had these 2 potential missing children, and so we were able to connect through the short tandem repeat, the STR markers. We're able to connect that they belong in this family tree. So we were able to show that we had a family unit of all of the children now.
It appears that despite the long-held hope Anastasia escaped her family's demise, the truth is much more tragic. The young Grand Duchess was killed with the rest of her family on that fateful morning in 1918. In the centuries since, she had been lying beside the other Romanovs, waiting to be identified.
The one thing that we were able to do in this case is to show conclusively that all of the family were executed and that no one survived.
And so the tragic fate of the Romanov family is finally revealed. But although the rest of the Romanovs lie together at the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the 2 more recently discovered remains are still unburied, held in a Russian state archive. Hopefully, one day the Romanovs will be fully reunited, so they can finally rest in peace. we next explore the mystery of two bodies that remain lost in the wild. It's October 16th, 1972, and I am in Anchorage, Alaska. Two rising political stars, Alaska Congressman Nick Begich and U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, have just boarded that plane. They're headed to a campaign fundraiser in Juneau, but they'll never get there, because soon after takeoff, this aircraft will vanish without a trace. What happens to them? Theories range from a Cold War plot to being swallowed by supernatural forces. But is the truth behind their disappearance even stranger? The day they disappear, Congressman Nick Begich and Hale Boggs hop on a 575-mile flight from Anchorage to Juneau, Alaska, that should take less than 4 hours. But when the plane goes missing, Peggy, Nick's wife of 16 years, gets the call no one wants to receive. A vast multi-agency search party is mobilized. Alaska's Coast Guard, the National Guard, and the U.S. Air Force set out to find the missing plane. It is one of the largest search and rescue missions in U.S. history. Over 100 aircraft and multiple Coast Guard vessels scour 326,000 square miles. President Richard Nixon even authorizes the top-secret SR-71 Blackbird spy plane to join the search. But there's no sign of the congressman's aircraft. Other suspicions emerge. With the Cold War running hot, could Soviet forces have shot down the plane? But for many locals who have experience in Alaska's vast backcountry, Begich and Boggs' disappearance comes as no surprise, because there have been reports of people going missing between Anchorage and Juneau for decades. This area is known as the Alaska Triangle, and since 1972, an estimated 20,000 people have mysteriously vanished inside. Wild theories abound. Some say strange energy vortexes are to blame. Others believe it could be associated with reported UFO activity. So, did the notorious Alaska Triangle just claim 2 more victims? Or was it something else, like a terrorist attack? Soon after the plane disappears, a group of Serbian nationalists claim they assassinated the congressman because of Nick Begich's support for the Croatian independence that they oppose. And Begich wasn't the only passenger with powerful enemies. On April 5, 1971, Hale Boggs delivered a fiery speech
to demand the resignation of J. Edgar Hoover,
accusing the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover of wiretapping congressional phones. Could the FBI have made the men disappear in retaliation? With no trace of the aircraft and no witnesses, it's all just speculation. Decades later, a mobster serving life in prison for murder named Jerry Paisley reaches out to the FBI with dirt to spill. Paisley spins a wild tale, claiming the 2 congressmen were assassinated by the mafia. And in a shocking twist, he says one of the lawmaker's wives, Peggy Begich, was involved. Paisley says that just a few months before the plane disappeared in Alaska, Peggy Begich met with a mafia crime boss in Arizona. How does he know this? Because that crime boss was also his boss. Paisley claims that he was personally assigned to pick Peggy up from the airport and drive her around. Author and historian Jeremy Kuzmarov has extensively researched this mystery and Paisley's revelations.
Jerry Paisley told the FBI that he escorted Peggy Begich to a meeting with Joseph Bonanno Sr., the famous crime boss. Paisley left and allowed Begich and Bonanno to talk together. We don't know what they were discussing.
So, politician's wife meets with mob boss, and just a few months later, the politician disappears. Now, some might call that suspicious. That is, if any of it is true. Many believe that Jerry Paisley was spinning jailhouse yarns in hopes of a reduced sentence, though the story he tells is intriguing. Sometime in the weeks following Peggy's supposed meeting with the mob boss, Paisley says he was assigned another task: deliver a suitcase to Alaska.
The suitcase that was delivered in Anchorage actually had a bomb in it. The mob put that suitcase on the plane with Hale Boggs and Nick Begich on board just before takeoff.
Paisley says the mob blew up the congressman's plane. Could this be the truth? Did he even meet with Begich's wife, Peggy? Well, it turns out there's one more twist coming, and it's a big one.
About a year after Nick Begich is declared legally dead, Peggy Begich marries Jerry Paisley.
The official story is that Jerry Paisley meets the widowed Peggy while tending bar at an Alaskan hotel. But he tells investigators a different story, that he hit it off with Peggy before her husband's plane vanished, the night he escorted her around town. Either way, as unbelievable as it may sound, the former Peggy Begich did indeed marry Jerry Paisley, as shown in this photo from their wedding on March 4th, 1974. Maybe this gives new meaning to keep your friends close but your enemies closer. But according to Jerry, there was a nice financial incentive that came with the marriage.
Jerry Paisley told the FBI that Peggy Begich received double indemnity, meaning double the insurance money, because it was ruled accidental. And with a huge influx of new cash from the insurance payout, they started to live the high life, going to fancy restaurants, buying fancy cars, homes.
Okay, let's pump the brakes here. Jerry Paisley's jailhouse confession is hardly reliable, and there is not a shred of physical evidence that Peggy was truly involved in her husband's death. It seems as though Peggy and Jerry didn't find true love after all, and divorced after only 2 years. Following their split, Paisley was in and out of prison for 15 years until he earned a life sentence, and in 1995 decided to tell his story to the FBI. And there is another question. If the allegations against the mafia are true, why would they want to kill the congressman?
We know the mobsters may have had motivation for wanting Begich dead. He was leading a drive against organized crime in Alaska, which was attracting a lot of profiteers and criminal elements who sought to profit from the oil boom that was taking place in the state and other opportunities. When oil was discovered in Alaska, thousands of oil workers moved into the state, and it created these boom towns. And the mafia sought to cash in by setting up illegal gambling, prostitution, and narcotics rackets. So you have a situation where the mob is making millions of dollars in the state of Alaska, and here you have this young, earnest congressman who's intent on cracking down on the mafia and put an end to their party. And it's inevitable that some kind of collision was going to occur and some kind of catastrophe. Boggs was known as a very powerful orator who could give very, very eloquent speeches, and that was a key reason for his political rise. When he gave a speech on the congressional floor denouncing the FBI and comparing his FBI to repressive police forces in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and warned about creeping authoritarianism in the United States, he said that the FBI was wiretapping his own phone. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI denied this and said that Boggs was lying. However, later revelation found that Boggs was telling the truth. The FBI was in fact wiretapping congressional phones and wiretapping his phone illegally. And I think that led him to become critical of the FBI, and he became very outspoken about the abuse of civil liberties of the FBI, and that may have caused him some powerful enemies.
Were Nick Begich and Hale Boggs really the brutal victims of an assassination? Well, if you want to believe the words of convicted mob associate Jerry Paisley, then the answer is yes. But Peggy herself has never been formally accused of or charged with any crime. Peggy and Paisley divorced after only 2 years. Perhaps that heartbreak drove him to concoct a crazy tale of bombs and briefcases. There is a missing piece that could solve this puzzle, the plane wreck itself, which has never been found. Until it's located, this remains just another strange mystery in the vast wilderness of Alaska. I'm Džoš Gejts, and I'll see you on the next expedition.